Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you very much for coming out this evening for our fifth talk of this winter season. So it's a penultimate talk, one more to go next month. I'm Keith Donald, and you've seen me a couple of times already this year. I'm standing in for Brian, who unfortunately can't be here again tonight, but he sends his best wishes and he hopes to be back in the driving seat in the next couple of months or so. So tonight it's a great privilege for me to introduce another Keith Dawson, Dr. Keith Dawson, who is an environmental scientist, and he became an environmental scientist before that became so cool. He calls himself a crop doctor. He's worked on 6 continents over many decades, 5 decades, and he has a wealth of experience about food security and just what's going on in the world in terms of the stresses and strains regarding the political issues relating to food security. Tonight, Keith is going to talk about 3 main topics. He's going to talk about global food security, which is a real passion for him. He's going to talk about the Pickups for Peace, a charity which he started in 2022. He's worked in Ukraine for over 20 years, so he knows the Ukrainians and Ukraine very well indeed. And he spent a lot of time in Poland. And with the political events in that part of the world, he was the co-founder of Pickups for Peace, which sends 4-wheel drive vehicles into Poland and works with aid organizations and takes care of people injured, both British, non-British, other Europeans and Ukrainians who are injured in the battlefield. That will be a fascinating aspect of tonight's talk. And we'll also hear about the time which Keith spent in Cuba on food security. So we're going to hear a lot about renewable energy, food security, Pickups for Peace. This will be a fascinating talk. Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. I don't know whether I'll be able to live up to that introduction, but nice to see you all tonight, and thanks for turning out on a cold night. When I woke up this morning, I was in Spain, and at 3 a.m. when my alarm went off, and it was a lot warmer there, I can assure you. But here we are. I'm going to talk, as Keith said, about a range of things. I'll start off with food security. The title of tonight's talk is 2 Revolutions, 2 Wars and a Tuber. And that really focuses on the Ukrainian side of the talk, which I will talk about at the end. The 2 revolutions being the Orange Revolution, which allowed the Ukrainians to throw the Russians out of Ukraine and allowed an opportunity for us to go and help them with their agriculture. 2 wars, the one that started almost 3 years ago to the day, and the one that started in 2014, just after the Maidan Revolution, because the Ukrainians have not just been fighting for 3 years, they've been fighting a lot longer than that. In fact, it's a country where over the centuries there's been an awful lot of battles. Even the Swedes have invaded and occupied Ukraine. And it was obviously, as many of you will know, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well at one stage. So 2 wars. And the unifying thing is the tuber, which is the potato tuber, which is one of the things that excites me. Yes, I'm that boring. You can hear me okay. I once asked that at a meeting and somebody said, well, yes, but I'm quite prepared to exchange places with somebody who can't. So I hope that's not the case. Okay, so first of all we'll start with I've talked about food security around the world, and I gave a talk to the first Asian food security conference in 2011 because Singapore is probably one of the worst examples of food security in the world, and I lived there for about five years and commuted to Ukraine. But never in the field of human history have so many been fed so well and so cheaply by so few from so little land per head. And I think we sometimes forget the agricultural revolution that we've had in the last 60 or 70 years. We now produce the same produce from a quarter of a hectare that we did from 1 hectare in 1960. So that's been a tremendous improvement in efficiency, and farming and science has helped that. And certainly that's also brought down the price of food in terms of the percentage of the budget that you have to pay for it. So I'm an optimist by nature, but I think, and we hear a lot of doom and gloom these days about food security. But what I can tell you is the good news that here we have the production, which is the orange line, which has gone up, or even over the last decade or so, quite markedly. There is still a tightness between supply and demand, but any famines these days are more political than they are in terms of supply. And I'm very positive about the future. The year I was born, there were 2 billion people in the world, and there's now around 7, and it's forecast to go up to 11 before it plateaus out. And I'm intensely confident that we can feed that number of people effectively and nutritionally. We had a crossover about 4 years ago where there were more obese people in the world than there were people who were starving. Obesity obviously being another form of malnutrition. But certainly the yields have been going up over the years. Farmers have done a good job there, and it's coming from less land, so it's protecting the environment as well. If we needed to produce the same yields and feed as many people as we did in 1960, we'd be using 4 times the land, which would obviously have intense environmental and biodiversity effects. There is a little blip in 22, 23 and 24 because the Russian war in Ukraine caused a spike in gas prices, and the price of fertilizers went up, and therefore farmers couldn't afford to use as much, therefore yields went down. It was not to do with climate change, it was to do with less fertilizer being used. And you can see here, this is the global food price index from 1961 to 2022. The percentage in the 70s, the percentage of disposable income that you were spending on food was about 30%. In 2021, that had dropped to about 8%. So that's all the foreign holidays and cars and luxuries that we have are due to the fact that we're not spending as much money on food as we used to. There's obviously been a sudden spike recently because of the war in Ukraine, but that's still nowhere near what it was in the 1970s in terms of the household income that was required to feed. But food security isn't a new problem. One of the reasons I live in Peebles is I love mountain biking, and this is one of the places I visited on my mountain bike in the mountains of Peru. This is the world's first agricultural research station, because science has always had a huge role to play in farming and feeding you. And here the Incans knew that they had 4 different climatic zones to grow their crops in, from the high mountains down to the desert plains, and they knew that 2 of them would fail every year, but they didn't know which 2. So they needed to know which varieties of potatoes, because obviously Peru is the home of the potato, and corn would grow at different altitudes. And so they very cleverly dug this arena, if you like, and sowed crop plots here to see which varieties would grow in which regions and at which heights and altitudes better. So food security is nothing new, and worries about it, and science has been looking at it for a long time. And we're very well placed in Scotland. We have some great scientists in this area, particularly the James Hutton Institute in Dundee, which I have a lot of association with. So one of the areas that I've been involved in is Africa, and this is maize drilling in Sudan. This was an irrigated project and financed by the Saudi government, and it was using irrigation water from the Nile, and I went to evaluate it, and they were growing wheat and corn amongst other crops. It was probably the most expensive wheat in the world, but the Saudis were so worried about food security that the price was almost immaterial. As you imagine, irrigating wheat in very sandy soils like this, almost like hydroponics, cost a lot of money and didn't produce high yields in the way that we're used to in Scotland. So it was very expensive to produce, but that was a premium they were prepared to pay to ship this from Sudan across the Gulf into Riyadh to protect their supplies, but didn't make very much economic sense. This is another area that I'm involved in is Ukraine, but also Brazil, Paraguay and Mozambique. And again, political pressures are a constant threat, whether in Ukraine or elsewhere. In Mozambique, we are growing soya and corn out there in a company that I help advise. And on Christmas Eve, you no doubt have seen on the news the political unrest because of the election defrauding in Mozambique. The farm was burnt down on Christmas Eve just before the sowing of the crop. So that's another threat to food security, is political unrest. Fair play to the team out there. They managed to get all the crops sown, but their farm is no more, and all the storage for the crop has gone. So we'll see how that works out. But political unrest is a big issue. This is same crop, soybean in Brazil, in the Mato Grosso, growing very well this year. They will have a record crop in Brazil. And generally, if one area of the world is having problems, another part of the world will make up for that. So there's a balance there. But supply and demand is quite tight. And one of the things that we've got to do is to reduce food waste, in that there's about 30% of the food that is wasted just from the field to the plate, and another 20%, despite all the crop protection that farmers use to protect against insects and disease and weeds, another 20-25% is lost there. So in the field. So there's a lot of scope for improving things, and in Ukraine, for example, we tripled yields by using good Scottish technology there and plants. And here again you can see, oops. Next slide. There we are. The soybean crop, a very important crop for protein. And also for producing nitrogen. Legume crops like beans and peas fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and therefore leave nitrogen in the soil for the next crop, and that saves on fertilizer. And here you can see that this is about 3 weeks ago. They're in the middle of their harvest now in Brazil. The password for our internet in our office used to be "farming never stops," and it's true on a global scale. When one farmer is harvesting, on the other side of the world, another farmer is drilling. And that'll be happening soon in Scotland. And here's another view of the soy crop there. This is using regenerative farming techniques, not using the plough, but using minimum till, so there's less fuel used, and the debris of the previous crop covers the soil and reduces the loss of moisture and improves the organic matter in the soil. So there's Brazil. Paraguay has had a terrible drought this year, but Brazil has been very productive. The other area that I've been involved in is Cuba, and if there's a more interesting place to visit and do business, I'd like to know about it. Cuba has a fantastic potential and was a powerhouse of agriculture production, but due to the political situation there and US sanctions, it has become quite moribund, and they've had to import, rather than export food, they've had to import a lot of food. So their food security and also their energy security is very poor. They're very good at education and very good at medicine, but they import a large amount of their food which they consume, and all their energy is based on, or it was based on, about 98% of it was diesel generated on dirty Venezuelan oil, which was on a bit of a sugary peg, as we'd say, in terms of supply. And there's not many prizes for governments that allow the lights to go out. So as a Scottish company, we set up in partnership with the Cuban government in a joint venture. The chairman of it, you may have heard of Brian Wilson, the politician who was energy minister under Tony Blair. He was chair of the company, and we set up Havana Energy to try and develop renewable energy in Cuba for them, to try and reduce the pollution and improve the stability. So it was based on the sugarcane industry in Cuba is still very big. It used to be even bigger because it was the biggest sugar producer and exporter for Russia. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, then the market collapsed for them, and a lot of the land was then left to become infested by weeds. Still a big sugar industry there, and when you grow sugarcane and extract the sugar, that's about 20%, 25% of the cane. You're left with 75% of it, which is called bagasse, and that's, well, what do you do with that? Well, one of the ideas it was to burn it, boil a kettle, if you like, and turn a turbine and produce electricity. So we developed Cuba's first renewable energy biomass plant, and it got the bagasse and the waste from the area around the factory, so there wasn't big transport costs. But the harvest only lasted for about 7 months, and it was sensible to obviously make sure that the power generation was going on all year round. So we looked at various other sources. And one of the things that came in to the land that was left bare was an ornamental plant that had been brought in the 19th century. It was a legume, so it fixed nitrogen. It was an African plant, and they call it marabou. So it found it's quite a spindly plant in Africa because of its the lack of fertility there. But because the land was agricultural land and had lots of phosphate and potash in the soil, and it was a legume, it had found its spiritual home in Cuba, and it grew. Now, if you can imagine something like a rhododendron bush, but with spikes, it's the most horrible plant. You can't even walk about it. Nobody likes it. There's no wildlife in it, bigger than a mosquito, because of the spikes. And it grows very slowly. But it took over about 4 million hectares of Cuba. So that was land that wasn't being productive, and was one of the reasons why they were having to import food. Very slow growing, but this is about 25 years growth. And some of you may have read in the papers in the last couple of days about Drax, the biomass producer user in Yorkshire that burns biomass from Canada and other places and produces power. Well, that's not really a very sensible thing when you're shipping wood from all over the world. And we found this marabou was about 4 times the calories in it. It was drier and it's a hardwood. It's one of the, I managed to bring a lump of it home once, and it's so dense that it sinks in the bath. So it's very calorific and also very dry, about 4 times the calorific value of the material that Drax are bringing over from Canada, that they've been getting into trouble from because they've been extracting from areas they shouldn't have done. And Drax tried to persuade us that we should harvest this and send it along to them, and they would burn it. We didn't see much point in that. We thought it was actually a very silly idea and was not driven by energy, but was driven by subsidy. And it's the subsidy of us in this room. So I think you've got to look at the whole energetic pathway of these things, and shipping it and then burning it in the UK was pretty immoral, really, in my view. So this marabou was an embarrassment for the Cuban government. We managed to find a way to harvest it and return the land to production. Because it's slow growing, you could use this material in the power plant, and then the land that was left after it was extracted, you could grow, 90% of it could be used for growing foodstuffs, and 10% for an energy crop, which would grow just more quickly than the marabou and would produce the same amount of energy per year. So it's been a good solution. Science can be a little bit rough and ready sometimes. So this is any of you recognise this is a cattle weighing mechanism here, and we cut out big quadrats of this marabou to weigh it to see how much was in a 10 by 10 square meters area, and then we calibrated it with data from the satellite data that University of Leicester had developed, and we could see what sort of resource was available to the Cuban government to put into their power stations. So it's even just taking a haircut of the marabou, the annual growth would be more than the EU imports in terms of wood for power stations in 1 year. So they have a tremendous resource there, and now we've shown them a way, we hope that they will develop that more strongly. We're producing about, at that first power plant, about 4% of Cuba's electricity at the moment. And that was one of the things we were trying to harvest. We developed a better machine with an Italian manufacturer, and which would remediate the land and return it to agriculture. And there's sugarcane being irrigated there in Cuba. But a fascinating place, Cuba. And if you've not been, I suggest you should really try and go. Culturally, landscape, wildlife, the people. It's a fascinating place, and of course politically. So I'll move on to Ukraine now, which is a country close to my heart. About 30 years ago, there was an agriculture student called Mark Laird from Angus, who left Cirencester Agricultural College. There wasn't enough work at the farm in Angus, because his elder brother was doing that, so he's looking for other opportunities. So we sat down at a restaurant in Edinburgh, and on the back of a napkin we worked out that it could be a possibility that he could take some land in Poland, and this was before Poland was in the EU. This would be ex-communist land, and you could rent that from the government, and they were looking for farmers to come in and farm it. So that's what Mark did, and he built up a business there, which went very well. And we developed a model there of production which was scalable, and we could increase that. But it was difficult to do that in Poland because there was less land available and the price of land was going up. So we looked at other places, and Western Ukraine looked as if it might be an option. That's the flag of Ukraine, and it's one of the only flags throughout the world which has farming on the flag. That's the blue sky and the yellow corn. Yeah, it's so important to agriculture and has been to Europe. Many of you will know that Ukraine was called the breadbasket of Europe, and both Napoleon and Hitler tried to capture it to ensure that they would have enough grain for their nations. Very good soils, certainly one of the most productive parts of the world, but not being run very well at the stage where we arrived. In 1930 and 31, Stalin collectivized what was a small agrarian, a lot of small landowners there, and they were basically told to give Russia and Stalin their land, and they would work as workers on the land, and the land was collectivized. That led to between 6 to 8 million Ukrainians starving in the 30s in what's called the Holodomor. So those who survived that, and many fled. It's a familiar picture today with Russian politics. Those who survived have a very intense love and feeling for the land, because they know that the little bit of land that they have around their cottage, or their farm out in the country, small area, but it's the difference between them starving and surviving in difficult times. So the land was decollectivized when the Soviets were thrown out. So these big 20 or 30,000 hectare farms that the Soviets had set up were each villager was given 1 or 2 hectares of land to own. And this went on okay for a little while, but the machinery broke down, there wasn't the capital, people left, it was a hard life. So a lot of this land was left derelict. So when Mark and I visited in 2005, this is the sort of picture that we saw in the west of Ukraine, more productive in the east, but in the west of Ukraine, it was basically land that had been left fallow for 12 to 14 years. The soil underneath was very good, so it was almost a moral. There was a lot of problems of food security in the world at that time, a lot of talk about difficulties in famine, so we thought it was important that we get this land producing again, former agricultural land just full of weeds. And not much wildlife benefit, to be honest. I remember going to this field, 130 hectare field, just outside Lviv in the west of Ukraine. Lviv, a city that none of you will have heard of 3 years ago, but now you've heard because of the war in Ukraine. A lot of UK journalists have given talks to camera from Lviv. This field here was 130 hectares, and I visited this with the old Russian agronomist. An agronomist is somebody who looks after crops scientifically and helps the farmers. And he said this was always a prize-winning field in the old Soviet days for sugar beet and potatoes. It always produced fantastic crops. The day we visited, there were 4 horses grazing the field, and at the far end of the field, the forest was starting to, the seedlings were starting to take over the land. So it was pretty desperate. And in the villages, there was about 90% unemployment. So we started remediating the land, with something which has now become called regenerative agriculture. And here, the first, one of the first fields that we ploughed here, controlled the weeds, and you see the level of the soil there, very rich. You could bag it up and sell it in 25 kilo bags in a garden centre here, and you'd be delighted to spread it on your garden. During World War II, Hitler took trainloads of the soil back to Germany, but fortunately left us a little bit to keep going with. So very rich land. But all the Ukrainians thought we were mad doing this in the west of Ukraine, because the soils, although they were good, they were better in the east. But we had spotted the fact that there were good soils, but there was a lot more rainfall from the Carpathian Mountains nearby than there was in the east. So in the old money, there was about 12 inches of rainfall in the east, so 30 centimetres, whereas here there was about 2.5 times that. So the combination of available land and good soil and also rainfall was very important. So we started by growing potatoes there. 4 of us put 60,000 in. I remortgaged my house in Pennycook at that time. Told the bank manager I was going to build an extension. Didn't tell him it was going to be in Ukraine and we'd be putting potatoes in it. So we grew 70 hectares of potatoes. One of the first fields we ploughed was ploughed with an old Russian tractor that had been formerly used for towing missiles. You know, you'd see them at the May Day parade back in the day. So we felt that was quite, a seminal moment. It was, swords into ploughshares, if you will. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about the reverse process. So we used potatoes to start with because they're a good cash crop. Potatoes in Ukraine are very popular. They're amongst the most consumption per head in the world, and I think they're 5th in terms of production. So we grew potatoes, and that's one of our first crops there. But the Soviets had left us a legacy of mismanagement, and I don't know, gardeners amongst you will know about what we're looking at here. You have a very good soil, but that soil in the middle there is a compaction pan, because the Russians had cultivated at the same depth every year for many years, often in not very sensible conditions, because it's all command and control agriculture there. As long as they'd gone by the manual and they could tick the box, it didn't really matter. So it doesn't really matter how good the soil is at depth here, because the roots of the crop or the plant are never going to get down to there, because they can't force their way through this concrete. So we had to do something about that. So this is the same field about 3 years later, after we'd used deep cultivations, then minimal cultivations, and used a range of crops to try and, like oilseed rape and potatoes, to try and open up the soil. And you can see this is almost the same spot in the field 3 years later. And you can see here the roots of the wheat there going down well. They'll go down, the soil here is very deep, they'll go down to well over 1 metre and exploit the soil there, get the nutrients and the water that they need. I remember standing in village halls at this time in Ukraine, around Lviv, because we didn't have any land. It was illegal for us to buy any land. If I was a Ukrainian with land and you were a Ukrainian with money, we still couldn't do a deal, let alone a foreigner. So the land title was kept by the villager, and all we could do was rent. So we had to go around the villages persuading people who'd been robbed by invaders for 2 centuries and more that these people from Scotland actually meant good for them. Now, fortunately, it was in the days before Fred the Shred was known about, and at that stage, Scottish reputation was of being fair-minded but hard business people, and we convinced them that they should rent to us. Very difficult to start with, because and some of the questions that they asked about how we would manage the soil harked back to this famine that they'd had in the 1931-32. Was somebody going to come and ruin their soil? You know, how were we going to manage it? What were we going to do? Very perceptive questions, and it told of a nation where the soil and farming is very close to the soul. So we managed to get a few hectares, they say there's 70 hectares, and once we started putting cultivators through it, they got quite excited because they thought we were just going to be trying to do something devious with it and weren't actually going to do what we said we were. And this was an unusual thing for somebody to come to Ukraine and to do what they said they would do, and to pay rent. So all these villages were getting $50. It was a hectare, which was very cheap compared to Western standards, but was set by the government. So the rental payments were spread wide and thin, and we gave employment, only one job per household, and we built up the business in this way. And gradually, people said, "Oh well, that's okay. You're putting crops in, you're paying the rent, you're providing employment." And then the next village wanted to get involved, and it just shows if you do what you're going to say, then sometimes it works out. So we grew potatoes, and obviously this is an area where there was a lot of conflict during World War II, and this is one of the things we often get in our potatoes. This is a World War II hand grenade. How many years on? 70 years on. Not a great thing to come over the dressing web to see. We have to get the local bomb disposal squad out. We have them on speed dial, and but I think there's a serious point here, because what we've seen in the last 3 years, and before that the previous 9, is an immense amount of ordnance polluting the land in Ukraine. And this is land that should be feeding the world. It may shock you to realise that 18%, and it's probably more now, of the agricultural land in Ukraine is neutralised for farming, because it's been mined by the Russians, or there's trenches, or there's other problems with it. And this is going to take an awful lot of time to remedy. They reckon that 1 year of mining takes 10 years to demine at a huge cost. So Putin, as well as creating a crime against humanity in a number of ways, is also creating a crime against humanity in terms of depriving the world of the production from these fields. And only the Russians could come up with a special mine-laying missile launcher which will fire mines up to 15 kilometers away with the prime aim of making the land unfarmable. Yeah, it's a terrible thing. They have these little butterfly mines which are about this big, which are scattered from helicopters, and they're designed not to kill, but just to maim, to blow the leg off, because it's more difficult and more costly and for a nation to have to deal with people who have been wounded in that way than if they're killed. These are very, desperate tactics, terrible. So we started off looking at how we would produce potatoes. So you've got to store potatoes and market them. Now this is not some sort of photoshopped old photo of a Dickensian workhouse. This is a flax factory. I think it was Tweed Green they used to dry the flax on, didn't they? This was to produce linen. You can see the working conditions here. This is 2007. This is not 1807. Yeah. So dreadful working conditions. I wouldn't show you the equipment, but basically guards on belts and things were something which had not been invented. So the first thing was to improve working conditions, and we took over this flax factory and made it into a semi-modern crop processing plant here for potatoes. Now, these are bags of potatoes. They will go to the supermarket because people are less sophisticated there. They don't need all the potatoes washed. They haven't forgotten how to peel them. and they will buy them in 25 kilo bags quite happily, and long may it continue to be so. So we grow potatoes for the table, for the supermarkets and for the local shops. We grow potatoes for seed for next year and to sell to other farmers. We grow potatoes for crisps, for those of you who like Walker's crisps. They are made by PepsiCo, and we grow potatoes for them, and we also grow potatoes for starch, but more about that later. Now, corporates, in a lot of cases, get a very bad press. I have to say that PepsiCo have been absolutely brilliant during the war at helping Ukrainian farmers. Yeah, it's been quite outstanding. So here we are back to 2007 again. This was a common sight here, planting potatoes by hand, tilling the land with horses, and this poor girl is thinking, is this what I've got to look forward to when I grow up? Well, it's not, but you will always see this sort of situation. Yeah, and there's the small areas around the village with small plots in there, which are then surrounded by larger fields. So we might have a 100-hectare field, but we'll have 100 landlords for that field, each of which will know where their plot is, and we give them the rent for it. So we move on to new technology. This is a drone which was used for spraying patches of weeds. Rather than spray the whole field, it would go over and sense where a patch of weeds was with an infrared camera, and it would spray the weed killer on that field, which obviously reduced cost and environmental impact greatly. About 12 years ago, we were the first people to introduce drones into farming in Ukraine to look at our crops, and we trained a lot of people to use them in our company. As the company built, we got more and more hectares, and it made sense to use drones to go over and look at the fields, and then the infrared camera would point out a patch where there was a problem, and then we could send the local agronomist to go and look at it and see what the problem was. Now, again, we've moved from the swords into ploughshares back, and ploughshares into swords, and a lot of the people that we've trained are now using drones for quite different purposes. And one of the guys that we started training, one of the early guys we started training, is the colonel of a drone regiment in Lviv, using this technology to protect his country. Oops. So we set up in 2005 with 90 hectares. By 2018, we'd grown to 200,000 hectares, which is about 500,000 acres. So it was, by that stage, Europe's largest regenerative farm, using rotations, minimum tillage, as little as fertilizer and crop protection as possible, but as much as was needed. So we developed a third model of farming, if you like. The top one there is what's happening in Australia and the United States, where there's a lot of hectares on a farm, but there's a fairly low input. The second there is UK and Germany is a good example, where farms are smaller, much smaller, but there's a high input. And then we have, that was our company name, Continental Farmers, which was high hectares and a higher input, but very much based around integrated pest management and using the best technology to minimize the impact and try and improve the soil. Because if we don't look after the soil, then we'll have no future. Organic, is that a way forward? Not really. It's a very small rounding error in food production and is much more expensive to buy. If everybody was farming organically, then there would be a genocide. Regenerative, that's what we do. You'll have seen the vertical farms, the greenhouses, but they are really only possible for using for high value crops like herbs and salads and things like that. They're not going to be producing the main crops that we need, like potatoes, field vegetables, wheat and so forth. So we use a lot of new technology. It's very important. So we move very quickly from the horse-drawn implements to GPS precision-controlled tractors, which were linked by satellites to make sure that they don't overlap, so it reduces fuel usage and it doesn't damage the soil. Using drones and using IT, and if you don't measure things, you can't manage them. So we spend a lot of time managing. So we built this farm up to 200,000 hectares, and then we sold the business, managed it for a few years, and then we set up another business 5 years ago called Central Plains Group. So these are all the sort of things that we're using. Genetics was very important. Scotland has a proud history of plant breeding, and potatoes, all the Pentland varieties, for example. That was the biggest step forward we made, was bringing better genetics into the crops in Ukraine. And I'll show you a few quick slides here of what a difference that makes. That's Ukrainian local potatoes in about 2007. Yes, there are potatoes under there, but not very. Just next door, here is our field of potatoes with one of our Ukrainian agronomists, looking a bit better. Here's sugar beet, that's local sugar beet. And the same day, about 200 metres away, is our sugar beet. Nothing clever, just using better varieties and having the capital to invest in fertiliser and to do the job properly. Using the same amount of land but producing more, which has an environmental benefit. Very important to train. We spent a lot of time training young people particularly. Some of the older ones weren't able to learn. They'd been so inculcated with the Soviet command and control ethos that it was very difficult. I remember in the early days we had 2 rooms in the Institute of Mathematics. That was our offices in Lviv, and so there were 2 empty rooms to start with, and we said, well, what about getting some furniture in? So that's a good idea. So one of the offices was going to be Yuri, who was head of the organisation, and the other bigger area was going to be an office for everybody else. So we said, well, what we need here is a big round table with seats. And they said, well, why would we want that? And we said, well, so we can sit round the table. Why would we want that? Well, so we can talk and discuss and decide what we're going to do. Why do we want to do that? And suddenly the penny dropped in Keith's dim head, and realised that the culture was completely different, and we had to take a different approach there. They were so used to standing in front of somebody and being told what to do that it was quite a culture change for them. And some of these guys here are now working for us. Some of them are working as heads of other agricultural companies. So we feel quite pleased that we've helped lift the knowledge levels as well. But it's a two-way street. We also developed, I don't have time to discuss this, but we developed an irrigation project down at a place called Mykolaiv, which you'll also have heard on the news. PepsiCo had a crisp factory there, which the Russians destroyed. We had a sugar beet factory that we developed with EDF Man, the International Sugar Company. Again, they targeted. So the Russians have been targeting farming there. This was the Europe's largest irrigation rig here, 1.6 kilometres along. And it spent a week walking down the field, and then it turned around and walked back again, sucking up the water from drainage irrigation channels there in the field that you can't see. So very important to work as a team, and this is one of my favourite slides. It's in a book called The Rational Optimist by a guy called Matt Ridley, and this shows 2 tools separated by a lot of years. The first tool on the left there was crafted and used by one man. The one on the right, Matt has calculated, involved 11,000 people in its production, from the mining and the fabricating and the software and everything else that goes into making that a useful tool for us. So all progress we have as a species is built on teamwork, and we feel that very much in Ukraine. And we thought we developed a pretty good team there for our new business. A lot of them had worked with us for a number of years in the previous business. But until you have a war and COVID, and you can't manage them but from afar, you then realise how good they are. And Ukrainians are very hard working, and they just need the opportunity. And their country was developing that, and that's why Putin, one of the reasons why Putin couldn't stand it, because he was seeing a developing country that was starting to get rid of corruption, starting to get develop well, and he couldn't have that on his border. So here is our team from Central Plains Group. We're part of them. We've expanded it now. We've built a factory out there to produce potato starch from potatoes, which is used in a lot of different things. And you can see here the sort of Ukrainian land there, the big sky of Ukraine. Yeah, that's one of our Central Plains things. Here's a potato harvester, and here's some of the potatoes being loaded here in the field. And we've built these stores from scratch, from ground zero, and they're all temperature controlled stores, so that the potato is a living thing, and if you let it its own devices, it will sprout, as you'll know from your larders or wherever. So we keep the potatoes stored at the correct temperature and humidity so they don't rot, so that there is a supply all through the year. There's only one harvest per year, but you expect to buy potatoes every 3 or 4 days or every week, and that's how they are stored. Here's some of the grading equipment to try and take out the rubbish and make sure the right grades are there, and how it's stored. Whoops. Yeah, they're in 1-ton boxes in temperature control. You can see the air vents there, which we can control the flow of air so that there's the right humidity and temperatures there. We also, at the start of the war, built a starch factory, which seemed like a good idea until the war happened. 3 years ago, at this time, when the Russians invaded, we had a decision to make. We were just about to plant our third year's potato crop. The Russians invaded. What were we to do? Should we pull out, or should we continue? It took us about, I think, 45 seconds to decide. We had to be loyal to Ukraine and our workers, so we planted. We didn't know whether the Russians would be harvesting the crop. And during this time, our team built the starch factory, which produces potato starch, which is used in a wide range of things. And we're expanding that usage because we are going to be producing, and we just got a UK government grant and also investment from Finland. We had to jump through a lot of hoops on that. And US aid that Trump is trying to dismantle have also helped us because helping farming helps the Ukrainian economy. The aim is to produce biodegradable polymers with potato starch, so that the carrier bags you have and the packing materials you have will be made from biodegradable material produced from potato starch rather than from plastics. So that's an expanding market. I want to finish off by talking a little bit about, if I may, Keith, I've got time, the war. You've all seen pictures like this. In fact, you've probably become a little bit inured to them. But it's the reality, and it's not that far away. It's 15 hours drive. And farming is not immune to this. This is part of the, I was talking about earlier about mines being spread, and here you can see that the tractor has hit one that's been fired. This is, the next slide is near the apartment in Kiev of our financial director. Kiev nearly fell, to the Russians. And here we have the Russian Orthodox Church blessing a missile, an arm of the state. This is one of the clinics that we help with our Pickups for Peace charity. And these are also some of the guys that we help. Tell you a little bit about Pickups for Peace. Since 2014 and the Maidan Revolution, which threw Yanukovych out, who was a Russian puppet and the Parliament had voted in favour of moving towards becoming a member of the EU, and Yanukovych was bribed by Putin to go the other way. So that's why there was a Maidan Revolution. The Ukrainian people wanted to look towards Europe and were foiled in that. So Yanukovych was deposed. In the early part of the 22 war, we bought 3 second-hand pickups and donated them to the front to help humanitarian organisations and also the military who were doing the work there to rescue civilians and to take wounded. This golden hour where somebody is wounded or injured and to get them back to the field hospital. 4-wheel drives are extremely useful in that and save lives. For about 6 months they did a good job, and then within a week 2 of them were destroyed by Russian artillery. Fortunately, the occupants were not killed, but some of them were seriously wounded. And so we thought, well, we should try and replace these. And then we thought, well, actually, why don't we try and get a few more? And 4 of us set up the charity Pickups for Peace. And we thought if we worked really hard, we might be able to get 30 and take them across to Ukraine and give them to the people that needed them. Because a lot of the roads are mined in the front, and so going across the fields is an important thing to do to get things done. So we thought we'd get 30, and due to the generosity of the UK public, particularly the Scottish public, and the borders has been way up there as well, being very generous. People have donated old pickups, or they've crowdfunded them. And I'm proud to say that all these vehicles are taken full of medical aid and other aid to Ukraine, and very gratefully received. It's humbling, the gratitude the Ukrainians have. They say that the vehicle is very important, the contents are very important, but even more important than that is the fact that people are prepared to drive a vehicle, find a vehicle and drive it across Europe. And they know that they are not alone then in facing the Russians. So we worked hard, and the first convoy we managed to get 30. And next week, on the 19th, I'll be setting off with another chap from Peebles, James Taylor, and we'll be driving, leading a convoy of another 30 to Ukraine, and that is our 18th convoy. That's has delivered. Now we're aiming for 600 vehicles delivered by the end of the spring. So we're up to 560 now, and this next one will be about 590. And we've got another convoy already planned for March. Thank you. I am told by my Ukrainian colleagues that I am far too conservative in my estimates, but most of these vehicles, the average lifespan when they get out there is about 3 months, before they're destroyed. In that time, my figure, and I'm told it's an underestimate, but it's a hill upon which I will die, is that each of these vehicles will save a minimum of 10 lives when you also take into account the aid that's in them. That's nearly 6,000 lives saved. And I always say that, that's 6,000 places at the Christmas dinner table that would be empty if it wasn't for the efforts of people like yourselves donating, whether it's enough for a shovel. We've £30 gets a combat tourniquet, which will save somebody's life. You can see the guy on the right there, that thing he has on his shoulder. That's a combat tourniquet that allows you, if your arm or leg is blown off, you can do that with one arm and stem the bleeding. So we sent thousands of those across. And here's something else we sent across, which we never thought we would be doing. This is me with Victor, who's the head of air defence in Lviv. And they were needing old fishing nets to put around electricity supply stations they shoot down about 90% plus of the drones that are sent across, but some get through, and if they have these screens up around, then they get caught in those rather than hitting the electricity supply, because Putin has been targeting the electric supplies. So the Borders has been very good. This is a donation we got from the Rotary in Kelso, a number of generators, because power is very important. And here's one of our convoys there. You can see all the vehicles lined up there outside the government offices in Lviv. And there they are on the road. So we've had over 1,000 volunteer drivers now from the UK, and a lot from Scotland who've driven these vehicles across. Some of them have done it 4 or 5 times. Not one has said they regret doing it. It's quite amazing. I've seen some pretty hard-nosed East Lothian farmers almost in tears when they go to hand over the vehicle. And here's another group. And this is a very sad sight. This is the military cemetery in Lviv, which we always visit to pay our respects. And it's grown immensely since this photograph was taken. I'm visiting again next Saturday with the volunteers that we take over there. And it's the custom in Ukraine, as in quite a few other Eastern European countries, to have the grave there, but also to have a photograph of the deceased. I remember one of our first convoys, we had 4 young lads from 18 to 22, one of whom had only passed his test 6 months before. And as it should be at that time of life, it was a jolly, adventure, driving across Europe in a camouflage pickup. But when they visited here, you could see the penny drop. There were guys there buried that were their age. And all of them, I get a bit emotional. All of them went back and crowdfunded another vehicle to take back on the next convoy. Fantastic. So we've had people from 18 to 85. We've had plumbers and electricians right through to hedge fund managers and landed gentry. And the social interaction between these the groups and that we take over the convoys is very good. Here is a picture from Donetsk. Electricity off and bombed here in Donetsk, and you can see these 3 children cooking their dinner on the open fire there. A bit of an adventure in some ways for them. Sad to say that 2 weeks later, all 3 of those children were killed by a Russian bomb and were buried in their nursery playground. So a lot of casualties among children, and 2/3 of the children of a nation have had to flee their homes. There'll be all sorts of terrible mental health problems and difficulties, even when there is a peace. So, this is a picture from New Zealand. A swallow hole swallowed up a tractor here. There were no farmers injured in the making of this photograph. But, doesn't matter how bad your day is, somebody else is having a worse one, so remember that. So I hope you found that an interesting whirlwind global tour of things. Think about Ukraine as we approach the 3rd anniversary of the war. They're struggling. Every night there are missile alerts. It's a national sleep deprivation experiment because things are sent out. It's rare that even in Lviv, where there are not that many missiles hitting, there's always missile alerts going on, depriving people of their sleep. So as you have a good night's sleep tonight, remember there are people who are not and who are working hard to defend Europe against Russian aggression. And the third army in Ukraine is the farmer. I guess the other, as well as looking after the soil and using water efficiently, this is the other take-home message. Those with a full stomach have many problems. Those with an empty stomach have only one. So let's hope that food security is maintained and that we have supermarkets full of produce. Certainly the farming community would do the best to make sure that happens, as will agricultural scientists. So thank you, and I hope you found it interesting. I hope I haven't gone too long. I do get a bit carried away, but happy to take any questions, Keith, if anybody's got them. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. Keith, thank you very much. Very, very moving. And it certainly opened my eyes to some of the issues which are happening on the ground. No emotion, no words that I can say tonight can express really the gratitude that I've got for what you and your colleagues are doing, not only for the world food supply but also in Ukraine. So thank you very much. Now it's the case that we've always got time for questions and answers here. I'm sure Keith's talk this evening has generated some questions. So can I just see a show of maybe hands, people who've got a question or two for Keith tonight? Right.
Hello. Does that work? Yes. Thank you so much for your talk. It's really been very interesting.
Thank you.
Something that interests me, and I'm backtracking a bit to earlier in your talk, was the varieties of potatoes that you actually use, which is of interest to us. Could you let us know?
Yeah. Yes. Well, interestingly, when we first started growing potatoes there, the locals said, well, you don't really need to bring in potatoes from abroad because we have varieties which are adapted to Ukraine. So we said, okay, let's grow them. Well, let's grow them. We'll grow the ones we think will be good here. Let's have Ukrainian ones and grow them side by side. And I remember being there, digging the little pots up and putting them in a heap, all the produce, and we didn't hear much about the Ukrainian varieties anymore, because not only were the varieties not very good, but they'd saved the seed for many years. Some of it was 10 or 12 years, and if you know about potatoes, you'll know that virus and all these other diseases build up and affect the yield. So we grow for different markets. So there's varieties we grow for starch potatoes, for the starch production, which have, you don't need to have too pretty a potato, you just need a big potato with a high starch content. We're growing things like Lady Clare for the crisps, which are the right size and the right frying quality and so forth, and the right sugars, and we have to store those well. So there's a whole range of different varieties we grow. Not many of them you'd know from this country, but Lady Clare would be one that's grown here, and there's a number of others which we grow. Yeah, a lot of Dutch varieties, but many of them grown in Scotland and exported. Yeah, and grown once in Poland, and then multiplied up in Ukraine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Here we go. Lady Rosetta would be another one. Yeah, that you would know maybe.
Keith, thank you for a very fascinating and inspiring and moving talk. I'm still blinking back tears, actually.
Me too.
So my question is about the ownership models now of your organization, your field. You started out with sort of 90 hectares, and each farmer kind of put in a bit, and so you paid rent, and then the profits then went back to those farmers, and now you have something on a massive scale. So do locals still have some ownership of this, or how does that work?
The law hasn't changed, apart from the fact that Ukrainians can now sell to other Ukrainians up to a small limit. But foreigners still can't. And we like that. We think that's good, because it means that the Ukrainians hold the land. They will get any benefit from land appreciation values. And we just want a farm. We just want the land. So we will rent from them. Rents have gone up over the years. One of the things that we created with our previous business, the first one which we grew, was aggregating all those contracts. As you can imagine, we had a whole department, because every hectare had to be certified and notarized, and the carbon footprint of the paperwork was pretty high, but not quite as high as the stuff in Cuba. That's a different world of bureaucracy, which is one of their problems. So the title is retained by the villager, and there's paperwork showing where the plots are. And initially it was quite funny, because we'd have maybe 50 villages. There'd be a 50 hectare field, and 50 villages would of those 50, 44 would say, yes, we want to work with you, and 6 would say, we don't believe you, So we would have either try and persuade them to move their hectare to the edge of the field, or we would just say, well, we'll cultivate it for you, and you can do what you want with it, but we'll run through it. And they were quite happy with that. And then probably of that 6, 5 or even 6 would say the next year, oh, well, we think we ought to be in as well, because they'd seen us pay the rent. And some people want the rent paid in dollars, other people want it in wheat, other people want it in potatoes. So we have a whole land department there working that out, and it's quite but by amalgamating, we created a value, which is quite interesting. So the great thing is that the villagers retain the land, they own it, and we just farm it. And we have to be good neighbours, and all our contracts have the paperwork about making sure it's looked after well, and that it's actually in better condition when we give it back than when it started. Which, when you look at some of the Soviet efforts, it isn't too difficult to achieve.
Keith, up here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for another great talk. Tour de force as usual.
Thank you.
You kicked off this evening by saying how successful agricultural scientists have been in quadrupling production in the last 60 years or so. Mm-hmm. And you looked forward with optimism that they could achieve the same again over the next number of decades. How do you think they're going to do that?
I think better genetics. I think gene editing will be part of that. I think using the future. It said that the future is here already. It's just not very well distributed. Yeah. By doing the best, for example, in Cuba, there's huge potential there, which isn't being realised. We showed in Ukraine how by using better varieties, better technology, using new technology. So a lot of the technologies are already here. They just need to be applied more effectively, and there will be other new technologies coming through as well. And things like gene editing, where the specific targeting of improvement for salt tolerance, or I think when I was at university, the holy grail was nitrogen fixing cereals. I don't think we're much closer to that, but tolerance to drought and these sort of things will be very important to extend. and improve the productivity. I'm a great believer in producing as much as you can from the good land so that you spare the poorer land for environmental services. Yeah. But it does require investment. That's the key, I think, Bill, as we both know. If you don't invest in research, and it's, you know, if you look in what's happening in the States at the moment with medical research and other research, it's quite a worrying situation. I think that there was a good example the other day where, studying the science of a particular lizard's saliva was, you would say, well, that's a pretty esoteric thing, but it's given us the diabetes drugs that are now being used for slimming as well. That came from investigating and analysing the saliva of a particular lizard. So you never know what will come round the corner, but we need to be looking and we need to be researching and we need to be applying, as you know, Bill. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for a fascinating and moving talk. I just wondered if you could give your view on where you think Ukraine will be in 5 years and whether there's an optimistic future for the country.
I think there is. I think that there will be a peace dividend when that peace eventually arrives, and I see already people are more keen to invest in Ukraine than they were even a year ago. We've just had 2 Nordic governments wanting to invest with us. I think that I would like to think that they would get all their territory back. There's probably a balance there that to be had, but I think we need to support them, you know, with or without the US. You know, they are really fighting for our freedoms as well as their own. And if Putin is allowed to win, it emboldens bullies all around the world to one of the things when I'm driving across Europe with my hands on that steering wheel, the first of which was a Land Rover Defender, which I never thought would get over the Scottish border, let alone the Polish border. But anyway, there are 2 things I think about. The first thing is, the next set of hands on this steering wheel, what challenges will they be facing? Yeah. And the other thing is, I've now got post-Christmas Eve, I've now got 4 granddaughters, yeah? And I want them to grow up in a world where might is not right, where there is a rule of law, and international regulations are observed. And that's what really the Ukrainians are fighting for. So it's important that we support them. If you look at the GDP of Russia, we say, we've got to have US on side. The GDP of Russia is only slightly bigger than that of Italy alone. Yeah. North Korea, as an economist pointed out to me one of our recent trips, North Korea, their GDP is slightly bigger than a mid-sized city in Ohio. Yeah. So they're not big, huge economic powers. Putin's currently spending 30% of his GDP on not defence, it's offence. Yeah. If Europe can't come together and combat that and support the Ukrainians, it might be expensive now, but by goodness, it'll be a lot more expensive in lives and euros and pounds in the future. So we've really got to step up, I think, and I think it's in the balance at the moment, yeah, and we need to push that balance a bit harder than Biden managed to do. He gave enough, but not enough. Yeah, yeah.
Have we got more questions? You mentioned that you were off next Wednesday to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Can I take this opportunity of thanking a lot of people this evening that have contributed to another vehicle that's going with you next Wednesday?
Yeah.
The Rotary Club have raised enough money to buy a vehicle, put all the medical supplies and what have you, and it's going next Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it's thanks to a lot of the people in here this evening.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Gosh, I shouldn't have gone to the gym this morning, I don't think.
Thank you for your talk. I just wanted to ask what you thought we should be doing locally in Scotland to protect our food security in the as climate change becomes a bigger problem for us?
Well, one of the first things to do, what we're talking about here, clubbing together to ensure that Ukraine manages to survive, because and I think hearing people have been doing that, and there was a great collection at Christmas time on the street for that. The Rotary, whether it's been in Kelso or Peebles, have been fantastic. In terms of food security and a broader thing, research is important. I'm not as sanguine about and doom and gloom about climate change as some are. I think there are positives from the enrichment of CO2, which nobody ever talks about in terms of plant growth. But by the correct research and applying the right technology, I don't think we need to be too scared. But the other thing, as I mentioned briefly, was make sure that we're not wasting as much, both in the house and in storage. Yeah. And not throwing away my comment about people not forgetting about the potato peeler in Ukraine is, we throw a lot of stuff out the grading line that is perfectly edible, but the supermarkets don't want to take it. Yeah. So it's tackling waste, it's using new technology, and it's applying it effectively.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Slightly different to most people. The fields in Ukraine that you took over, were they as huge as they are now? And the fact that they are huge without any hedgerows, etc.,
Yes.
is that good, bad for diversity, insects, wildlife?
It's a very good point, that. Yes, they were. They were the old Soviet patterns. We've actually put more barriers in than there were, and protected watercourses more. There is in Western Ukraine, there's an awful lot of woodland as well, and that's very well protected. There's a lot of environmental protection laws in Ukraine, and but that's how they were. We've not amalgamated them and taken out hedgerows. They were like that already. Yeah. But biodiversity is important, and for example, one of the things that we help a lot is the local beekeepers, because there's an awful lot of work goes on in the villages with bees. Yeah.
Are there any more questions tonight? I've got a question. I just like, you mentioned right at the start about fertilisers and the use of fertilisers. So is the jury out on the use of fertilisers? Are fertilisers good to a certain extent? Because I had heard that they ruin the natural qualities of good soil.
I think if you use the optimum amount to grow the crop, then they're perfectly okay. Right. And farmers can't afford to use more than that now anyway. I think there's also the question of organic fertilisers and artificial fertilisers. There isn't enough organic fertiliser to go around, and it's costly to move around as well. And I'm never sure how you square these things where we're supposed to be eating less meat, but you need more animals to produce the organic fertiliser. So that's a difficult one. But used properly, I'm very confident there's very little environmental damage. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So that's it. Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you again for such a brilliant talk this evening. Absolutely outstanding. And I'm sure many other people in the auditorium tonight will feel exactly like I feel. Very moving. You've opened my eyes to some of the real human issues going on in Ukraine at the moment, and for that I cannot thank you enough. So thanks very much.
Let's get the next vehicle to. Sorry? If you just Google Pickups for Peace. Pickups for Peace. Yeah.
So just before we all head home, and I wish you a very safe, as they say on planes, an onward journey. I wish you all a safe onward journey tonight. Our next talk, obviously, is on the second Tuesday of next month, March, and that's our last talk of this 2024-2025 season. Our AGM is on the Wednesday, the 9th of April, and that's for our members. Please do come along. We'll tell you about our accounts and what's been happening this year, and we'll also be looking ahead to 2025 and 2026, and we've already nailed that program, so that's great. This has been a very emotional evening. I'm going to end on an emotional point as well, but a slightly different one. I think many of you will have read that Scottish Borders Council has decided not to give the core grant this year to the Eastgate Theatre. I don't know whether this number is out in the open or not, but it's £60,000, which the theatre is not getting. So to put it crudely, that's a huge, huge hole in the income of this theatre. And I have to say that that puts the survival of the theatre in some doubt after the next few months. So there is something on the Eastgate Theatre's website about that. I'll probably be speaking to our secretary, and there'll be a note out to our membership about the need to raise funds. Fraser, the newish, I think he's been in the post 6 months, CEO of the operation here, is working diligently and assiduously to come up with some ideas. But I just want you to realize that actually this sort of evening is not guaranteed in the future. And that makes me very sad. So thank you very much.
Just from PickupsforPeace, I work with them. I do know that equally I do Sudan